Welcome to Rainbows in the Dark, Episode 3 How Loving One Person Can Change Everything. Way back in high school, around 1990, I had a huge crush on this guy, Bobby. He was stunning. Amber eyes, killer smile, long brown hair with golden highlights, olive skin. I had no idea what his ethnicity was. I just knew he was hot. Every time he smiled at me, I melted. Of course, being an immature, emotionally suppressed weirdo, I never said a word about how I felt, but I loved being around him. Bobby radiated positivity and joy. But then one day we were hanging out and something was off. For once, Bobby wasn't smiling. He looked diminished. His usual golden glow had turned gray. Then, out of nowhere, he started crying. He wiped his face, mumbled something about needing to go, and he left. I turned to my friend Jeff and asked, "What's wrong with Bobby?" Jeff sighed. "It's his family," he said. "They're Palestinian from the West Bank. Some of his family got killed." My stomach dropped. I didn't know anything about Palestinians or the West Bank except for whatever I saw in the news or overheard in conversations between my dad and the old men at church. And I'm ashamed to admit that back then, when I pictured a Palestinian, I imagined a guy with a beard, a machine gun, and a headscarf. Not someone like Bobby. Not someone I could love. That moment changed me. I promised myself that whenever I caught myself making assumptions about a group of people I had no direct experience with, I'd stop and question myself. Loving one person changed my entire perspective on a whole group. Fast forward to 15 years later. I married a Jewish person, had a Jewish child. Growing up, I didn't know any Jewish people. In the church I was raised in, and even at home, all I ever heard were wild conspiracy theories about how they secretly run the world and how they were the ones who killed Jesus. The word Jew was used as a verb and a slur. They were those people. To be honest, even after getting married to a Jewish person, there was a tiny lingering voice in my head that was like, I wonder if we're going to be rich now. You know, the whole secret world domination thing. Spoiler alert, that's not real. My finances are proof that if there is a secret wealth network, I definitely missed the invite. Anyway, in 2006, I went to a conference in Washington, D.C. and decided to visit the Holocaust Museum, something I hadn't done since 1993 when it first opened. The first time I visited the museum, it left a haunting impression. It's probably the most intense museum I've ever been to, but nothing prepared me for what I would experience on my second visit. Back in 1993, Jewish people were an abstraction, but in 2006, I had a Jewish family. I had a Jewish child. Less than 15 minutes into the museum, my eyes started tearing up. Because if this happened again, they would take my baby. As I moved from floor to floor, reading the stories, looking at the photos, my brain couldn't stop whispering, this is what would happen to my baby. And then it hit me. Every single person in these stories was somebody's baby. By the time I got to the final floor, I had cried my way through the entire museum. On the customer experience survey at the exit, here was my suggestion. You need Kleenex stations on every floor of this museum so people don't have to hold their faces together until the next bathroom. As I walked out of the museum, I realized something. It was that love thing again, because now I loved someone who was Jewish. I had a child who was Jewish, and I could never think of Jewish people as some abstract those people ever again. 15 years later, same lesson, but this time I was those people. I was sitting at breakfast at a B&B in Washington, D.C., and the conversation turned to trans people. The host was left-leaning, so they were generally pro-trans rights, but they said something like, I don't even know any trans people. I looked at them and said, sure you do. I told them, you probably know lots of trans people. Like me, I'm trans. I was born female and transitioned about 15 years ago. The table went silent. I'm just under 6 feet tall, have a full beard, and people rarely clock me as trans. So the host and everyone else at the table was stunned. A year later, I went back to that same B&B and the owners took me out to dinner. They told me that my one comment at breakfast had changed their lives. I had no idea what they meant. They explained that when they found out that I was trans, it completely reframed their perspective. Suddenly, trans people weren't some distant political concept. They knew one. They already liked one. And when people around them started talking bizarre shit about trans people, they would shut it down because they had a real lived connection now. Once they loved just one person in that category, everything shifted. It's easy to fear or misunderstand a group of people when they're just an abstraction to you. But the second you love someone in that group, everything changes. So, if you're struggling to feel warmth or compassion for an entire group of people, try this. Find just one person. Love them. See where that takes you. I promise love changes everything. Drop a comment and let me know how loving one person changed an old idea about a group for you.